Welcome to this video. Chapter 5. The journey continues. Alice and Walter made their way down the mountain, the sun beating down on them with increasing intensity. The road was long and winding, but the two of them were determined to reach the capital. As they walked, they chatted about their recent battle with the dragon and what they had learned from it. "That was pretty intense," Alice said, a hint of excitement in her voice. "I mean, I've never fought a dragon before." "Have you?" Walter chuckled. "No, I can't say that I have," he replied. "But I have fought my fair share of monsters in my time." Alice raised an eyebrow. "Really? Like what?" Walter grinned. "Oh, you know, the usual stuff. Goblins, trolls, ogres. The occasional giant spider." Alice shuddered. "Giant spiders? No thanks. I hate spiders." Walter laughed. "Yeah, they're not exactly my favorite either. But sometimes you have to face your fears, you know." Alice nodded, a determined look in her eye. "I know. And I'm ready for whatever comes our way." As they continued down the road, they encountered a group of travelers heading in the opposite direction. Alice and Walter greeted them warmly, eager to hear any news or information they might have. "Hello there," Walter said, a friendly smile on his face. "Heading to the capital?" The travelers nodded. "Yes, we are," one of them replied. "We heard there's a festival going on, and we didn't want to miss it." "A festival?" Alice asked, intrigued. "What kind of festival?" The travelers grinned. "It's a celebration of the harvest," they explained. "There's music, dancing, and lots of food and drink. It's a great time." Alice's eyes widened. "That sounds amazing. We have to go." Walter hesitated. "I don't know, Alice. We're on a mission here. We can't get sidetracked by a festival." Alice pouted. "But come on, Walter. We've been through so much already. We deserve a little break, don't we?" Walter sighed. "Fine, we'll go. But just for a little while. We can't lose sight of our goal." Alice beamed. "Yay. Thank you, Walter. You won't regret it, I promise." As they continued down the road, Alice couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was what she had been searching for, a chance to experience new things and make new friends. And with Walter by her side, she knew that anything was possible. As they approached the city, the sounds of music and laughter grew louder. Alice's heart raced with anticipation as they entered the bustling streets, lined with vendors selling food, drink, and trinkets. Walter scowled at the crowds. "This is a disaster waiting to happen," he muttered. "We need to be careful." Alice nodded, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of joy as she took in the sights and sounds of the festival. She darted off towards a nearby food vendor, eager to sample some of the local cuisine. "Wait up, Alice!" Walter called after her, his voice barely audible over the din of the crowd. Alice turned back, grinning from ear to ear. "Come on, Walter. Live a little." Walter shook his head, but he couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. Together, they made their way through the festival, taking in all the sights and sounds. As the sun began to rise, the group packed up their camp and set off towards the town. Along the way, they discussed their plan to find the lost city. "I think we should start by asking around town," Alice suggested. "Maybe someone knows something about the city or has heard rumors about it." Walter nodded in agreement. "That's a good idea. We can also check the library and see if there are any historical records or maps that could point us in the right direction." As they entered the town, they were immediately struck by its lively atmosphere. Merchants were shouting out their wares, and people were bustling about their daily business. "Excuse me," Alice called out to a passerby. "Do you know anything about a lost city around here?" The person stopped and gave her a puzzled look. "A lost city? I'm not sure what you're talking about." Alice sighed, realizing that this might not be as easy as she thought. But they continued asking around, and eventually, they met an old man who claimed to have heard stories about the lost city. "I heard that it's hidden in the mountains, far to the east," he said. "But I also heard that it's guarded by a fierce dragon, so you'd better be careful." Alice and Walter exchanged glances. They had already faced one dragon and survived, but they knew they couldn't let their guard down. "Thank you for your help," Walter said to the old man. "We'll keep that in mind." As they made their way to the library, Alice couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. They were getting closer to finding the lost city, and she couldn't wait to see what secrets it held. At the library, they searched through countless dusty tomes and maps, trying to find any mention of the lost city. Finally, Walter came across an old map that showed a mountain range to the east. "Look here," he said, pointing to a spot on the map. "This could be where the lost city is located. And if we follow this trail through the mountains, we might be able to avoid the dragon." Alice peered over his shoulder, studying the map. "It's worth a shot," she said. "Let's go." As they set out towards the mountains, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to something big. She didn't know what secrets the lost city held, but she was determined to find out. As they journeyed deeper into the mountains, the air grew colder, and the landscape became more treacherous. They had to navigate narrow passes, rocky outcroppings, and steep cliffs, all while trying to avoid any signs of the dragon's lair. Walter led the way, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any danger. Alice followed close behind, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. They had been traveling for several hours when they heard a strange noise up ahead. Walter signaled for Alice to stop, and they crept forward, trying to stay quiet. As they rounded a bend in the trail, they saw a group of bandits blocking their path. Well, what do we have here?" the leader of the bandits said, eyeing Alice and Walter. "Looks like we've got some travelers in our territory. And it's not safe to be wandering around here alone." Alice unsheathed her sword, ready for a fight. "We don't want any trouble," she said. "We're just passing through." The bandit leader laughed. "That's too bad. Because you've stumbled into our territory, and we don't take kindly to outsiders. Hand over your valuables, and maybe we'll let you go." Walter stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "We won't give you anything. Now step aside and let us pass." The bandit leader drew his own sword, and the rest of the bandits followed suit. Alice and Walter stood their ground, ready for a fight. The battle was fierce, with swords clashing and bodies tumbling to the ground. Alice and Walter fought side by side, their skills complementing each other perfectly. The bandits were no match for them, and they soon retreated, vanishing into the mountains. As Alice and Walter caught their breath, they surveyed the aftermath of the battle. The trail was littered with bodies and broken weapons, and the air was thick with the smell of blood. "That was close," Alice said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But we can't let our guard down. We still have a long way to go." Walter nodded, his expression serious. "Agreed. We need to keep moving, and stay alert for any more trouble." As they resumed their journey, Alice couldn't help but think about the bandits. They were just another obstacle in their path, but she wondered what had driven them to a life of crime. She made a mental note to keep an eye out for any signs of poverty or injustice as they continued their quest. The sun was beginning to set when they finally saw the entrance to the lost city. It was nestled in a valley between two towering mountains, hidden from view by a dense forest. The city itself was in ruins, its ancient buildings crumbling and overgrown with vines. "This is it," Walter said, his voice filled with awe. "The lost city." Alice took a deep breath, feeling a sense of excitement and trepidation. They had finally found what they were looking for, but she knew that the secrets of the lost city would not be easily uncovered. As they approached the lost city, the trio could see that it was eerily quiet. The buildings were crumbling, and the streets were overgrown with weeds and vines. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of a broken door. As they made their way through the ruins, Alice couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. This was a city that had been lost to time, and yet it was still standing, a testament to the ingenuity and skill of its builders. Walter, on the other hand, was more focused on the task at hand. He scanned the area, searching for any signs of life or danger. "Keep your guard up," he warned, "we don't know what we might find here." As they walked deeper into the city, they came across a group of creatures that looked like a cross between a giant lizard and a scorpion. They were hissing and spitting, their sharp claws clicking on the stone ground as they approached. Alice pulled out her sword, ready to defend herself and her companions. But Walter had other plans. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small, round object. With a flick of his wrist, he threw it towards the creatures, and it exploded into a cloud of smoke. The creatures retreated, disoriented by the sudden burst of smoke. "Smoke bomb," Walter explained, grinning. "Comes in handy in situations like this." They continued on, encountering more and more obstacles as they explored the city. They had to navigate through crumbling buildings, dodge traps, and fight off dangerous creatures. But through it all, they kept their wits about them, relying on their skills and their trust in each other. Finally, they reached the heart of the city, where the ancient temple stood. It was a massive structure, with towering pillars and intricate carvings. As they approached the entrance, they could feel a sense of power emanating from within. "This is it," Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The source of the magic that's been plaguing our world. We have to stop it." Alice nodded, gripping her sword tightly. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to let fear overcome her. She had come too far to give up now. Together, they stepped into the temple, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As they entered the temple, they were greeted by a large, open chamber with a staircase leading up to a higher platform. The room was dimly lit by torches, and strange symbols adorned the walls. Walter led the way, cautiously ascending the staircase, with Alice close behind him. Suddenly, they heard a loud, piercing screech. They turned to see a group of winged creatures swooping down towards them. Alice and Walter readied their weapons, and with a fierce battle cry, they charged towards the creatures. Alice slashed at them with her sword, while Walter unleashed his magic, sending bolts of lightning towards the attackers. The creatures were no match for the two warriors, and they were quickly defeated. They pressed on, determined to reach the source of the magic that was causing so much chaos in their world. As they reached the top of the stairs, they found themselves in a large room, filled with strange artifacts and glowing crystals. In the center of the room stood a large, ominous figure, clad in robes and wielding a staff. Walter stepped forward, his eyes locked on the figure. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What have you done to our world?" The figure laughed, a sinister sound that echoed through the chamber. "I am the master of this temple," he replied. "And I have tapped into the power of the crystals to fuel my magic. Your world is nothing but a playground for me." Alice stepped forward, her sword at the ready. "We won't let you get away with this," she said, her voice firm. The figure sneered. "You are no match for me," he said. "But I'll give you a chance. If you can defeat my guardians, I'll let you leave this place alive." With a wave of his hand, the figure summoned a group of powerful creatures to do battle with Alice and Walter. But the two warriors were not deterred. They fought fiercely, their weapons clashing against the creatures' hard scales. The battle was intense, and it seemed like the creatures were never ending. But finally, Alice and Walter emerged victorious, their weapons dripping with blood and sweat. The figure watched them with narrowed eyes. "Impressive," he said. "You have proven yourselves worthy. I will release my hold on the crystals and let the magic dissipate. But know this, I will always be watching, and I will not hesitate to strike again if you cross me." With those words, the figure disappeared, leaving Alice and Walter alone in the chamber. They looked around, taking in the strange artifacts and crystals, feeling a sense of relief that their mission was complete. As they made their way out of the temple, Alice and Walter knew that their adventure was far from over. But they also knew that they were stronger and more capable than they had ever been before, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they made their way through the deserted city, Alice and Walter could hear the sounds of battle in the distance. They knew that they had to find the source of the commotion, and fast. As they turned a corner, they saw a group of soldiers being attacked by a horde of undead creatures. Alice and Walter quickly sprang into action, unleashing their weapons on the undead. The soldiers were relieved to see them and joined the fight, their swords clanging against the undead's bones. The battle was fierce, and the undead seemed to be endless. They kept pouring out of the buildings, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. Alice and Walter fought side by side, their swords flashing in the sunlight. Walter summoned his magic, creating a shield of fire that engulfed the undead, incinerating them on contact. Alice used her agility to dodge the undead's attacks, then delivered a swift blow with her sword. The soldiers fought bravely, but they were no match for the sheer number of undead. Suddenly, Alice noticed a strange creature among the undead. It was larger than the rest, with glowing red eyes and sharp claws. It seemed to be directing the undead, giving them orders. That must be the source of this madness. Alice shouted to Walter. We have to take it down. Walter nodded and they charged towards the creature. It let out a roar and charged towards them as well. Its claws were like daggers, slicing through the air towards Alice and Walter. But they were too quick for it, dodging its attacks and delivering blows of their own. As they fought, they could hear the soldiers cheering them on. They had rallied around Alice and Walter, fighting with renewed vigor. The creature was tough, but they were relentless. They kept chipping away at its defenses, until finally, it let out a mighty roar and crumbled to the ground, defeated. The undead stopped moving and the blue glow in their eyes faded away. The soldiers cheered and clapped, grateful for Alice and Walter's help. Alice and Walter breathed a sigh of relief, their bodies still buzzing from the adrenaline of the battle. That was intense, Alice said, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Indeed, Walter replied. But we must keep moving. There may be more creatures like that lurking about. They continued through the city, their eyes scanning for any signs of danger. As they walked, Alice couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for the once great city. It was now a mere shadow of its former glory, overrun by the undead. But she knew that there was still hope. If they could defeat the source of the undead, then perhaps the city could be saved. And Alice was determined to do just that. As the group continued to explore the city, they found themselves facing a group of bandits. The bandits were heavily armed, and they outnumbered Alice, Walter, and their companions. Walter unsheathed his sword, and Alice summoned her magic, ready to defend themselves. But before they could even attack, a group of mysterious figures appeared out of nowhere, dressed in strange cloaks that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. The figures swiftly attacked the bandits, their movements fluid and precise. Within moments, the bandits were defeated, and the mysterious figures stood before Alice and Walter. Who are you? Walter demanded, his sword still drawn. We are the Guardians, one of the figures replied, her voice calm and even. We have been watching you, Alice and Walter, and we believe you may be the key to stopping the darkness that is threatening to consume this world. Alice and Walter exchanged a look, unsure of what to make of this. But something about the Guardian's presence felt familiar, almost comforting. Will you help us? The Guardian asked, her eyes locking onto Alice's. Alice hesitated for a moment before nodding. We'll do whatever we can to stop this darkness. Good, the Guardian said with a small smile. We will be in touch. And with that, the Guardians disappeared as mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving Alice and Walter to wonder what their next move would be. Thank you for watching.